Welcome. Here to talk about EigenLayer. Again, I'm Eric from Celo, and please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Vyas. I've been with the EigenLayer team since the beginning. I'm working on product and some ecosystem growth for EigenDA as well. But yeah, very glad to be here and very glad to be partnered with Celo. So super excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here, and excited to talk about EigenLayer. When I heard about it, I was skeptical. Then I read the white paper in what took me maybe 10 minutes. You get a really good idea if you kind of just skim through it. And the thing that I'd love to talk about right now is, what is EigenLayer? Maybe people here, quick show of hands, who's read the white paper? Oh, there's a lot of potential people, and we got some young kids here. Could get a head start on EigenLayer. But what is EigenLayer? And maybe you can talk through like the parts of what make or comprise EigenLayer.
Yeah, for sure. So EigenLayer is a security and a validation marketplace. And it consists of like two major components with really three big players in the ecosystem. So it's economic security, which is derived from Ethereum restakers, and validation services, which is derived from the operator network and the community that we have in the Ethereum ecosystem. So EigenLayer, and I mentioned, three major players in the space. There's, the economic security from restakers, which is Ethereum stakers that want to restake onto the EigenLayer smart contracts. And then you've got node operators who are providing this validation services. And we're a marketplace that essentially aggregates these two for middlewares or protocols that need to bootstrap their projects in the early phase, but also those projects that may be developed already that want to align themselves to Ethereum specifically. And we see ourselves as a addition or like permissionless feature addition to the Ethereum ecosystem, and really focused on improving the programmability of the Ethereum landscape. Yeah.
So I love the kind of overview. The way I look at it is, when you're building right now, if I build a new groundbreaking protocol, the chance of it attracting, security either through staking and things like that is actually quite expensive, and there's a lot of downsides to it, right? So for example, like if I made a new protocol and I'm like, hey, I know you're big in ETH, can you come over? You'd kind of be like, I don't know. So maybe you can explain how do people take advantage of this concept of restaking? Because I feel like that is, to me, like a really interesting concept.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should start by, kind of defining the landscape a little bit, right? So Bitcoin really pioneered decentralized trust, and like the Bitcoin white paper and the movement was massive to the space. But Ethereum came in, and with the implementation of EVM, it really enabled innovation in the dApp layer, right? Which is where we saw plenty of dApps be able to evolve and develop very quickly. But what we wanted to do was potentially increase the scope and programmability of Ethereum itself, and to your point of, projects needing to bootstrap themselves, right? And whether that's through staking or previously token launches, every project needing its own token for security isn't necessarily the correct paradigm by which we should be approaching this, because as you mentioned, it also requires you to attract users away sometimes from the Ethereum core protocol, right? And you need to drive adoption to this alternative L1. And that can be really challenging for a lot of projects, and often the incentives just really aren't aligned. So what we wanted to enable was a way for Ethereum restakers, but also Ethereum builders to participate in this mutual agreement of supporting each other. And so Ethereum restakers can really earn extra yield by restaking onto the EigenLayer smart contracts as a result of bootstrapping innovation. And similar to how venture capital actually decoupled the relationship between capital and innovation, where VCs bring in the capital and builders and smart people and entrepreneurs get to bring in the innovation. Similarly, we wanted a way for Ethereum builders to be decoupled from the capital components of bootstrapping, which is kind of the core point of why EigenLayer exists, and also as a result of our founders' attempts in the past. Shriram attempted a blockchain idea quite a few years ago and struggled with the bootstrapping problem. So when reassessing and coming up with a new strategy to enter the landscape, one of the main values that he wanted to focus on was trying to eliminate this bootstrapping problem for other builders as well.
I guess when you think about the players, like what are in the EigenLayer space, like what are the big parts? I know there's like a concept of a VA, like a validator that can, do the kind of basic stuff and then potentially through restaking, do other things for other projects. Can you describe the moving parts of it for folks who are trying to understand, or maybe even a brief overview of like ETH2 staking, right? It's like the very common method of like staking 42?
32.
32 Ethereum, and then being part of the validator network. Like, how does this extend that?
Yeah, totally. So currently nodes and node operators in the Ethereum ecosystem are participating in ETH consensus. And as a result of each node having 32 ETH, they have ability to slashing mechanisms, essentially as economic guarantees, which is why we all work in proof of stake systems, right? And these node operators are currently, primarily only focused on Ethereum consensus, but there are node operators with additional block space, and block space is where and this goes to there's a lot of conversations in the space about making sure EigenLayer doesn't overload Ethereum consensus. And that's kind of driven around the fact that there are some participants in the Ethereum ecosystem that don't necessarily have the technical requirements or bandwidth, or their node infrastructure isn't prepared to handle additional computational load, which makes perfect sense. But the institutional operators and plenty of other node operators are often using AWS or certain infra providers and have access to additional block space. So EigenLayer is kind of a way for those operators to really maximize their existing infrastructure by providing them access to participate in supporting these new middlewares and these new actively validated services, which again are modules on top of whatever Ethereum client that you would be running. You would now be running additional containers with these new projects and supporting in the validation of them.
I think a lot of people in the Celo community got excited about the recent announcement, right? And EigenLayer is mentioned in that. So maybe we can connect the two. Like, why do you think so many people are talking about what EigenLayer unlocks, like more practically? And I'm kind of leading the witness here, but I do think it's the concept of restaking. For example, there's projects like Impact Market, right? They distribute, I'm going to butcher what they do, but I look at it as a way to distribute money to many people in the world, kind of like good dollar as well. But being a part of that particular community requires you to acquire their token to stake it. But what if through EigenLayer in an L2 model, what if I had Ethereum, can I participate in a project like that? If they're, how would that work? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And part of the reason why we're equally excited about this Celo partnership is we share some of the same core mission values. Celo has always been about increasing global adoption for the crypto landscape. And we at EigenLayer believe that we're an incubator and we're a playground for Ethereum's builders. And so any work that we do, not only does it increase the EigenLayer ecosystem, but as a result grows the Ethereum landscape. And so now Ethereum participants get to engage in further alignment. And we constantly hear this in the space of like L1 alignment. But what does that really mean? With Celo, now you have this existing L1 that has a roadmap and has the process by which they can enter the Ethereum ecosystem on an L2 and participate and really inherit the benefits of additional economic security that these Ethereum restakers provide, while retaining some of the cool and interesting implementations that the Celo team has already worked on for the past few years, whether that's one block finality or some of the cool things that we're excited for, where Celo is going to introduce decentralized sequencing, right? So these are all very very interesting means by which we can really bring in some of the more interesting components of innovation that aren't happening within the Ethereum ecosystem, sometimes as a result of the limitations or the current state of the Ethereum protocol. And rather than necessarily waiting for an EIP to go into effect, which Celo has been responsible for pushing forward a lot of very cool EIPs, we similarly are looking to accelerate that development as well, whether it's EigenDA and 4844, which is donk sharding or proto-donk sharding, or smart contract triggered withdrawals, which is something we're equally excited about, right? It's really a way for us to bring in some of the cool components that exists in other ecosystems. For example, there's a reason why builders sometimes go to ecosystems like Solana, and that's often due to their throughputs, right? TPS is something that we all hear about, and it enables all these cool use cases. Well, I mean, we're not affiliated to them, and I've been shilling them a lot at ETHCC, but Monad, which is this project that's doing parallel execution on EVM, they are reaching near 10,000 TPS numbers within the EVM ecosystem, which now enables a plethora of use cases within Ethereum and brings those builders and Ethereum users, a lot more interest, a lot more value, and just generally a lot more excitement about what can be built.
Yeah, I think what I'm really hearing is there's this new method, right, for validating or staking that unlocks doing more things. And there's an incentive, I think, for an EigenLayer. What do you call them? A VA, VAS? AVS, sorry.
AVS, or we're even messing around with, decentralized SaaS, or these are infrastructure providers, infrastructure builders, right? And similar to, at the end of the day, if we want to drive adoption, infrastructure precedes use cases, right? In AWS or cloud infrastructure, the predominant majority of, the work required to build a project is abstracted away for the actual builders. And most applications that we interact with are highly modular. You use AWS for your backend, you use OAuth for your sign-in, you use Stripe for your payments, and yet the end user doesn't even know that all these modules are what they're interacting with, right? And similarly, we look at the Ethereum landscape the same way, where, yeah, we're building DA, but someone else is building, and we're reliant on these smart contract rollups to improve computational scaling, right? We're reliant on these players to build all these other modules so that eventually we can support a bunch of new use cases and drive more adoption.
And I think I like this idea of new innovation, new ideas coming. The problem always is that getting started step. And I think the EigenLayer, to my understanding, will help to jumpstart all of these, because people will be more likely to experiment if they know that they don't have to start from zero. They can start from, in many cases, you need to get someone that fully understands, is really bought in, and stake something to get things moving, right? So I hear you there. This does sound a bit theoretical, but I understand that you folks are moving forward with a lot of things. Maybe you can share what the status of where things are at, and maybe it sounds like you had opened up a small batch or a cohort of people to start staking under EigenLayer. So how far are we from theoretical to, trying these things out in real life?
Yeah, definitely. So we're moving quite methodically, and sometimes that's as a result of this agility versus stability trade-off that you need to make sometimes. So predominantly our first launches have been restaking focused. So we opened up our smart contracts to enable people to restake a couple of different types of liquid staking tokens that represent ETH, right? As well as native stakers to be able to repoint their withdrawal credentials to the EigenLayer smart contracts and start restaking on EigenLayer, which we've done 2 phased launches so far, and they both went amazingly well. So we're really happy with the excitement from the community around that. And our next few launches are comprised of really refining this operator experience and making sure that we are enabling operators to easily validate for new services. And part of that is this service that we're building internally, which is EigenDA. And EigenDA, along with this operator, you know, private, then public, then eventually mainnet, right? Sort of phased launches again, but we want to enable these operators to validate for EigenDA, be able to store data, and then slowly but surely open this up further to all the AVSs that want to build, and that comprises of Eigen SDK. And that actually went into its first alpha playground and, you know, a sample AVS that we're building actually this week. Shout out to our team, which rushed to get this ready for ETHCC for us to be able to share with some of our partners. And again, we're doing a private testnet followed by a public testnet followed by a mainnet. So very gradual and methodical growth there.
Yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, but you had mentioned, I think, EigenDA. Can you, if we have time, can you pause and explain that piece? Because I think EigenLayer already, but the restaking component, I kind of lump a lot of ideas into that. Can you talk about what EigenLayer DA is? Because I've also, in conversations with C Labs and the community, that gets mentioned, and it could help, like, I think a lot of people try to understand what does that mean for someone like Celo? What does that mean in general for the Web3 community?
Yeah, totally. So EigenDA is a data availability service that, you know, is, we initially called it front-running proto-donk sharding because we give a lot of credit to Donkrod and Proto Lambda and the community for some of their developments. And with their insight, we've been actively developing our internal version of it. And really, data availability isn't about long-term archival storage or, you know, Google Drive or things like that. It's very specifically focused on input and output for computations, and that usually comprises of either fraud proofs or optimistic proofs or ZK proofs of some sort. And there are some cool projects that are trying to do hybrid models of both, which I'm actually quite excited about. But you know, these fraud proofs have to live on a DA layer for about a week or 2 weeks, depending on the amount of time that the blockchain needs to come to some result of finality. And that's an area where we're really excited with the Celo partnership for, you know, EigenDA nodes to be able to store some of the transaction ordering and then be able to, you know, use Celo's existing PBFT consensus mechanisms to retain the one block finality models, but then use these DA nodes to really store data and improve, like, and what we want to focus on is, again, throughput and scalability, right? So we're currently on 10 megabytes per second on our testnet, which is, you know, quite a bit ahead of what the proto-donk sharding and donk sharding implementations are going to be like. And part of that reason, again, is about building infrastructure that can support future use cases. With 10 megabytes per second, we really want to enable on-chain gaming. We really want to enable social networks, whether it's Web3 streaming platforms that want to use us for financial transactions today, but eventually maybe support some of the use cases that exist on Web2 that would potentially be able to live on Web3.
I mean, the data availability part, because it's not meant to be permanent, sort of enables that, right?
Yeah.
Because I know we talked about the L2 proposal had included things like the decentralized sequencer, and it sounds like it would benefit from having that data accessible, right, for whatever period of time necessary. And it's like a couple days, something like that.
Exactly. I think the proposal does a really good job of explaining the architecture, and I don't want to butcher that by any means. But at the same time, I think what's cool is the Celo nodes can access the proofs or the ordering that's available on the EigenDA nodes, and they can use that to order the transactions, or, you know, if a fraud proof or if something needs to get triggered, then, you know, you have access to that data readily available for that finite amount of time. And yeah, going back to some of these like cooler use cases that we can enable, some of the stuff I'm really excited about is, you know, how we can influence creator economies, or like how we can use more interesting, you know, revenue models that exist, and really bootstrap this ecosystem of like widespread adoption, which doesn't necessarily exist with certain use cases that might just be DeFi or NFT, which can be inherently limited to their audience sometimes. Whereas, you know, it would be, and again, this is an ideal world, but like it would be amazing if we could have some sort of Web3 equivalent of Twitch that has instant superfluid payments going back to creators, where creators can have, you know, a lot more control over their own ecosystems that they're building. Right? And again, that's something that I'm personally passionate about and looking forward to build in the space.
Cool. I mean, I like that. I hadn't even thought of that, so I think you're super close to the idea, and you can see the applications. And at Celo, the team I lead is around dApp development, and we do some, you know, core community stuff, but mostly around getting people to build these ideas. So hearing that makes me think that's a great opportunity for like a hackathon. You know, hackathon idea. We're going to be at ETH Global. I don't know if you folks are yet, but maybe in time. And many times you want to give people like some sort of new component to add into making their, you know, making up a new idea or a new concept. And for me, I believe creativity is like two similar or dissimilar things, just pushing them together. So it sounds like you've thought about this a lot. And you had mentioned EigenLayer DA, and I think that's, for me, I was trying to get a better understanding of what that is. And you had mentioned the SDK. Are there more components to EigenLayer, or what else is there in the current ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. Part of our challenges right now have been going to market. It has been around engineering. We've been running quite lean, and you know, massive shout out to our engineering team. We have some amazing people on board, and we're actively increasing our headcount and bringing on incredible talent. But our main focus has been this operator experience that we're trying to design, along with Eigen SDK, which is this you know, ability for middlewares to easily develop onto EigenLayer. Part of this has to do with you know, a change in the narrative and change in design philosophies, right? And it's really beneficial to see that some of our design patterns are sticking, especially in restaking already, where we see restaking pop up in the Cosmos ecosystem with interchain security and with projects like Informal Systems, or you know, Professor David Shea from Stanford, who's building Babylon Chain, which wants to use Bitcoin for you know, Bitcoin for, again, shared security models, right? So it's really nice to see restaking as a design pattern stick, and something that we're really passionate about is building these design patterns that can be replicated in different use cases. So similarly, we want to have something for Eigen SDK where these projects are used to designing their protocols around perhaps a token to bootstrap their own protocol. And now that bootstrapping isn't a thing, well then maybe the protocol design needs to be changed, right? Or maybe you're restricted by DA previously and now DA has been enabled, so now you can enable all these other ideas and use cases that you might have had but couldn't prioritize. So our main focus is, again, operator experience, Eigen SDK, Eigen DA, and we're really excited to work with bridges, work with, you know, oracles or things like that, and introduce new ways and new models. But we are restricted by our engineering team and how much we can do, and that's why we actively want to incubate this ecosystem of builders and not just try and go about building all of this ourselves.
Got it. And you know, I noticed that you mentioned operators, and so it's sort of like you're changing the word of validator to be more than that, right? Is that the right sense, or are operators and validators distinct? I would love to understand that distinction, because my next question is, well, what can I do, right? If I have some Ethereum, or if I'm on the Celo community, how do I figure out which part I want to play, and maybe where can I go?
Yeah, I mean, I think we tend to use operator and validator somewhat synonymously. Validators is probably the more accurate terminology, because you're really validating for the consensus of a protocol. And you know, as somebody in the space, what you can provide if you have Ethereum, I mean, I guess I have to say the disclaimer, this is not financial advice by any means, right? But you can restake onto the EigenLayer smart contracts, which is very much an option. And if you have nodes that you're running already, we're looking forward to being able to support, you know, additional middlewares that can generate yield for you, right? And if you don't run a node, what you can do is delegate your stake to operators or validators, and they will run nodes on your behalf. And there's going to be high degrees of freedom of the types of projects that validators can opt into. And based on their risk portfolio or based on their own passions, they can choose to support and validate for individual projects. And similarly, based on your risk portfolio, you can choose to delegate to whichever operator, right?
Cool. Well, I appreciate the overview. Any final thoughts for the community here? I mean, there's a lot of people from a lot of different projects. I know you mentioned like how they could get started if they wanted, if they're already staking. But anything additional? I also know that like we talked about and mentioned, with the L2 proposal, EigenLayer, but like there's probably still stuff the community needs to do, right? I mean, support, maybe test stuff, be a guinea pig, things like that. Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, of course. So, again, a design pattern that we hope other projects in the space will follow is something that Celo is kind of leading up front. An alt L1 moving to an L2 on Ethereum that's aligned with Ethereum is amazing, and we hope that some of these other projects that are interested in doing something similar would follow suit. Celo is obviously kind of poised to do that with the amount of experience and background with EVM already and being EVM compatible. And some of these other projects are going to be challenged to do so because they might have to rewrite some of their core code base or things like that. So we totally understand that. We are planning to offer some cohorts for the operator testnet experience and similarly for ABSs. And we're in active conversations with plenty of builders, and feel free to reach out to me or any of our team members, whether it's Twitter or Discord, about proposals you might have. And to your point about hackathons, we're actively trying to design some proposal competitions or hackathons to really incubate this community of builders and see how we can support them, whether that's giving them feedback on their protocol design or working directly with them to see how the EigenLayer integration could play out, as well as getting their feedback on some of these established builders' feedback on operator experience, dev experience for SDKs, etc.
All right, well, thank you for telling us more about EigenLayer. Appreciate it. And thank you everybody for attending this talk. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.